in the 16th century to be unilateral in origin and bilateral in administration. So it's a difference between the substance of the covenant of grace, which, right? So the covenant of grace is gracious in its essence. So what is grace? It's God's unmerited favor, unmerited by us, merited by Christ. So Christ merited favor for us. We receive it unconditionally. So that is absolutely the case. And so that's what we mean when we say unilateral. God comes and he makes the covenant of grace. And he says, I will be a God to you and to your children. Whosoever, I'm thinking about Jesus, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. That's unconditional language. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. That's unconditional language, but it's administered in a bilateral way. And bilateral simply means that we have to respond. And then there are, as I was saying earlier, consequent conditions. So the antecedent condition of the covenant of grace was met by Christ for us. The consequent conditions that's just a fancy way of saying, now that we've received this grace unconditionally, how should we respond? That's all that means. So this is just another way of saying guilt, grace, and gratitude. Law, gospel, sanctification. Sanctification is our grateful response in union with Christ in the covenant of grace. And that's just our way of talking about, or the more technical way of talking about it is to talk about a bilateral administration. That doesn't turn the covenant of grace into a covenant of works. Now, there are some guys who have talked that way, not many in the tradition, I don't think, certainly not our better, more important Orthodox Reformed writers or Reformation writers, but there have been some who've talked about the covenant of grace in some ways, so emphasized the consequent conditions without really clearly distinguishing between antecedent and consequent, that they've tended to turn the covenant of grace into, if it were possible, into a covenant of works.
Yeah.
And that's a mistake.
Yeah.
But we certainly do have obligations, consequent obligations, and that's the bilateral part. Bilateral just means two parts, two parties, two people. So unilateral is one part, one party. Bilateral is two parts, two parties, and two sides. And so we certainly believe in a bilateral administration of the covenant of grace.